Today we're covering a very special topic. Today we're talking about the theory that Gurung and Malikev are the same individual by looking at videos from Miss Chalice, Dan Allen Gaming, and Smoketown. This idea has been around since the game was released and was quickly adopted by large swaths of the community. And this topic is special because it is covertly laying the foundation for transplanting the time is convoluted mindset from Dark Souls to Elden Ring. Time convolution has been used for over a decade now to justify all sorts of unreasonable conclusions, which is how these things usually go, right? Broad myths get solidified as canon and are later used as the foundational Broad myths get solidified as canon and are later used as the foundation for theories that compound on each other unto eternity. Misinformation is a cancer that never stops growing until it's consumed the host and left nothing behind but the husk of a formerly elegant and beautiful work of art, now mangled beyond all recognition. All the truth of the universe can be undone by the seed of a single lie, like a timeless cosmic horror spawning from the void to challenge reality itself. Little did we know that we, ourselves, had conjured that horror, in a time beyond memory, in a space beyond sight, with a reckoning, without fail. So, let's talk some lore, shall we? Like I said, we're looking at 3 different videos, but they all kinda share the same core theory. The initial indications that Gurung and Malikev are the same come from them having the same appearance, the same voice, the same beast clergyman title, kind of the same alias, where Gurung's former name meant Death of the Demigods, while Malikev is described as being feared by all demigods, and from them having the same plate thingy on their hands, which Smoketown describes as a rune of death plate. All this points you in the direction of the conclusion they're the same. And then there's the final piece of evidence that supposedly confirms that conclusion, which is the fact that if you complete Gurung's questline by feeding him enough death root, Malikev gains new dialogue where he seems to recognize the Tarnished when we arrive at his arena in Farum Azula. And that's basically that. Very straightforward. When you glance over this list of facts, it kinda feels like a foregone conclusion, right? Gurung is Malikev. Okay. But then, of course, this also creates a big contradiction, in that Gurung and Malikev exist in 2 separate places at the same time. You can go to the Sanctum, you can go to Azula, and they're both always there at the same time. Even if you've killed one of them, the other one is still there, which should, in theory, disprove that initial conclusion, but luckily, the lore provides an answer to this problem as well. You see, Placido Sax exists beyond time, so the reasoning is that if Farum exists outside the flow of time, then there's actually nothing wrong with the beast clergyman's 2-body problem. By changing the rules of how time works around this subject, the two-body problem ceases to be a conundrum that needs to be explained, and it becomes a feature of this new system that you've built instead. Time's convoluted, baby. Praise the sun realm. So, now we have an underlying framework there, combined with a solid piece of evidence, which is Malikev's new dialogue, leading to the conclusion they're the same, and we have time convolution as the solution to the problem created by that conclusion. But if I'm talking about this theory in this series, then that means I have some problems with this stuff, right? So let's start with time convolution. Not just because that's what interests me the most about all this stuff, but also because that's the solution to their problem. Meaning that without this solution, there is no theory, right? Without this trump card, Grunk and Malikev just can't be the same anymore. Water break. Okay, so let's break the time convolution problem down into 3 parts. Okay? First, there is a flaw in the approach they're taking here. The game says Placido Sachs lies at the heart of the storm beyond time, but the game never says the same concept applies to Farum Azula as a whole. That's just an assumption they make. But that assumption goes against the evidence provided by the game, since from the perspective of the Farum Azula we get to visit, we need to go back in time in order to fight Placido Sachs. The Dragon Lord's arena is in the past, before Farum was crumbling. These are 2 very clearly distinct instances, separated by time. If crumbling Farum Azula exists in a different time than Placido Sachs' arena, then there's no reason to assume Farum is also beyond time, just as Placido Sachs is said to be. That's not to say it can't be, just that it's unreasonable to simply assume that it is. Okay? Now, second, the game is actively providing evidence against the assumption crumbling Farum Azula is outside the flow of time, since that location is visible from the surface of the lands between. Placido Sachs' arena is disconnected from our current point in time, but crumbling Farum Azula is right there. It looks the same from the inside and the outside, which at least implies that it isn't outside the flow of time, that it's just the regular time flow version of that place chilling in the sky. But that still leaves some leeway, right? In theory, it could still be in the past, between Placido Sachs and now, or it could be in the future, when Farum continues to crumble forevermore. Well, no, it can't. It can't, because lastly, the burning Earth tree becomes visible from Farum Azula after we've set that golden tree ablaze. If the Farum Azula we visit existed outside the flow of time, setting the Earth tree on fire in our present wouldn't affect the Earth tree that is visible from that place. That's just logic. It's kinda like in Dark Souls 3, the eclipse is visible from Lothric, but not from Firelink Shrine or the Untainted Graves, because those 2 places really are outside the flow of time that governs Lothric as a whole. Crumbling Farum Azula can't be in the past, because if it were, setting the tree on fire now wouldn't be reflected in the past. right? And crumbling Farum Azula also can't be in the future, because if it were, then the Earth Tree would always have been on fire from the moment we set foot in that place, since that would have happened in that future's past. Do you get what I'm getting at? This is just logic. The game is providing us with the evidence to realize that the crumbling Farum Azula we visit is the same crumbling Farum Azula currently visible in the sky. It's not outside the flow of time, it's not in the past, it's not in the future, it's just now. Both Gurranq and Maliketh are in the present. The two-body problem is real. They can't be in two places at the same time. And before we talk about Maliketh's dialogue, I want to make a side note regarding Placido Sachs, because I think it provides important context. Like, the game says he's beyond time, but that's not like literally correct. Placido Sachs isn't outside of time. He's just in the past. And those are not the same thing. He's said to exist eternally beyond time because he's alive in the past, and the past will always be there. It's Schrödinger's dragonboard. He'll always be both alive and dead, depending on the point of reference you're looking at it from. Like, we kill him in the past at a specific moment in time. Let's say we killed him 1 minute before midnight. So, if you go to any point in time after that day at midnight, he will always be dead. But if you go back to 2 minutes to midnight, he'll still be alive. It doesn't matter if it's from today, tomorrow, or next year. If you go back to any point in time before we killed him, he will always be alive at that point in time. This is the same time travel dynamic used in Dark Souls. Artorias didn't defeat Menas. We did. But Menas had already been defeated by the time we started playing the game. The past didn't have to wait for us to travel back in time in order to happen. The past had already happened, because it's in the past. We had already defeated Menas. The only difference is that at that point in time, when we started playing the game, we hadn't traveled back yet. But the future had also already happened, since our present is the future's past. So, even if, from our perspective, we didn't know about it, or if it hadn't happened yet in the future, the time travel, we had always traveled back in time. And we had always defeated Menas. The same applies to Gundyr and Filianor's Rest in Dark Souls 3. Everything has always already happened forever. Once we set things in motion, we cannot escape the consequences of the choices we make. Okay, so now that we've established that time is not convoluted, let's talk about that solid piece of evidence. Let's talk about Maliketh's dialogue. First, it must be noted that the same logic still applies here, right? The fact Firin Gurranq influences Maliketh indicates Farum isn't outside the flow of time. And it also indicates Farum isn't in the past either. They present this argument as if it were supposed to confirm their conclusions, the Power Hunters, but it actually works against them. They're arguing against themselves. Maliketh gains new dialogue from Gurranq because Gurranq can teleport away from the sanctum, meaning he was free to tell Maliketh about the Nice Tarnished helping with the Deathroot problem. And Gurranq doesn't gain new dialogue from Maliketh because Maliketh is stuck in Farum, and also dead by the time we're done with him. So that explains why information only flows one way. And if we expand this argument to include the whole range of dynamics between these two characters, well, then killing one should just kill the other, right? If time isn't convoluted, then killing one should just kill the other. If they were the same. Also, if they were the same, killing Maliketh and releasing the Rune of Death should make Gurranq hostile. Just like killing Gurranq should free the Rune of Death. But neither thing happens, which, incidentally, also means they definitely exist at the same time. If one of them was in the past and the other in the future, relative to each other, then one of these two things would have happened when you killed them. But neither thing happens because they're both distinct individuals existing in two separate places at the same time. And just as a preemptive argument, neither one is an illusion either. No illusion Ornstein BS here, please. Gurranq needs to eat the Deathroot and Maliketh harbors the Rune of Death. They're both real. There's no indication whatsoever that they're illusions. Please, please, please. Don't go there. It's not a safe place. Don't go there. So, yeah. Not only time convolution can't explain away the problem that negates this theory, their most solid piece of evidence is working against their conclusions as well. So, now we get to talk about that underlying framework of similarities that gave the initial impression they were the same. Because the thing is, yeah, Gurranq and Maliketh look and sound the same to us, but you know, all beastmen look and sound the same to us. They both dress the same and have the same title, but just like there's a whole army of standardized beastmen soldiers, the statues in Farum indicate there was a whole caste of beast clergymen who dressed the same way. The same goes for the so-called Rune of Death plate on their hands as well. Which, by the way, I've seen argued before that plate, their hands, that's where Maliketh sealed the Rune of Death, so it means they're the same. But the Rune of Death was explicitly sealed inside his body, not his bling. All this means there's nothing strange about them looking the same on the surface. There's no indication here that they should be the same guy. There's no reason to consider that possibility from this framework alone. But, if they're not the same, I hear you ask, what are they then? Well, they're just two different shadows, given to two different Empyreans. That shouldn't be surprising to anyone, right? Empyreans are given shadows. The Glowmite Queen was an Empyrean and Gurranq was her shadow. He wielded Destined Death during the God Hunt, which gave him the name Death of the Demigods, and since Maliketh later wielded the same power, he inherited the kind of fear Gurranq's reputation once held. And, you know, having been the Glowmite Queen's shadow and wielder of destined death, explains Gurrank's hunger for death route now. It's like a really simple explanation. They're just not the same guy. The only reason not to believe this is if you think the Glowmite Queen and Marika were also the same person. But I made a 5 hours long video explaining why that also makes no sense. So, yeah. And, well, this is it. This is the theory. We're still going to talk about the other stuff Smoketown talks about in his video, but when it comes to the theory that Gurranq is Maliketh, this is it. And, well, I want to take a moment to talk about this theory in the context of this series, the Debate Parlor series. This is the third theory we have debated, and after the analysis is done, all these theories have something in common, which is that, well, there's no initial evidence that leads to the conclusions these theories come to. That's really important, and I don't think I made that clear enough with the last two theories that we discussed. I tried, but it's like there's a difference between arguments that are meant to prove a concept and arguments that are meant to explain the dynamics surrounding that concept after a conclusion has already been reached. For example, the first theory we talked about in this series was the idea that the lands between and the Shadow Realm used to be conjoined land masses, right? The evidence, the arguments leading to that conclusion were the interviews, the inscription of the suppressing pillar, and the fact both maps fit together. These are the pieces of evidence that led to and confirm the conclusion of the theory. Everything else comes after that conclusion has already been reached. Those three arguments are the foundation upon which everything else is built. You can speculate about how Marika could have done it and why. You can speculate about how the societies would have interacted with each other, but without that initial set of arguments that lead to the initial conclusion, without that foundation, all this other stuff is just pure speculation. These all become what-if scenarios, I can't stress this enough. You need the evidence leading to the initial conclusion. Without that, you have nothing. Okay? So, when it comes to the initial set of arguments, well, the interviews not only aren't in-game evidence, but I also talked about the problems I had with the translations people were using, right? Then, the inscription on the pillar makes the 2D maps fit together even less than the position most people seem to have been using. And lastly, I showed without a shadow of a doubt in 3D, which was called into question by the way, that the maps simply don't fit. They just don't fit. That's just a fact. And everywhere, not just on YouTube, but everywhere, the most common type of counter-argument that I saw was people trying to justify why the phrasing of the inscription doesn't matter that much. And the pillar doesn't actually have to be in the very center of the lands between, because the inscription doesn't actually matter that much. And people trying to justify why the maps don't actually have to fit together. Actually, And even here on YouTube, it wasn't just a white channel. Sometime later, a bigger channel made a similar video. most counter arguments I saw fell into one or both of these categories. Now, here's the thing. When people do that, what they're doing is they're dismissing that initial set of arguments, those initial pieces of evidence that led them to their initial conclusion. But if the phrasing of the inscription doesn't matter, and if the maps don't have to fit together, then why would you even consider the possibility both lands were together to begin with? A conclusion without evidence isn't a conclusion. It's a guess. It's just a guess. It's an opinion. If you dismiss those first arguments, everything else you're talking about just doesn't matter anymore. The farther away you walk from the initial arguments, from the foundation of your theory, the weaker the theory becomes, regardless of how many secondary arguments you try to throw at it. I'm sorry. This is just a little aggravating, first, because it's not just with lore hunting that people do that. You have to deal with that kind of reasoning when talking about all kinds of stuff in real life. And second, because, well, I've been doing this for almost a decade now, and this has been a problem since literally forever. This happened with Dark Souls, this happened with Bloodborne, and with Sekiro, and now with Elden Ring. It's like the illusion Ornstein theory. That theory is based entirely on a single item description. That's the whole foundation of the theory. Everything else is basically just fluff. But then you point out, well, yeah, but that's actually a mistranslation. The actual description doesn't support your theory. And people just ignore that. They just ignore the fact that the single piece of evidence that was supposed to lead them to the initial fundamental conclusion of their theory doesn't even exist. And they just keep repeating the other arguments without realizing the conclusion doesn't exist anymore. They no longer have a theory to defend. Same thing with the Lands Between in the Shadow Realm, same thing with Marika and the Glowmite Queen, same thing with Gurranq and Maliketh. You can speculate about how things would have worked if they were the same, but that's just speculation, because there's nothing leading to that initial conclusion to begin with. And this stuff compounds on each other, like I said at the very beginning. People have used the Shadow Realm / Lands Between theory to justify the Marika / Glowmite Queen theory. And I've seen people mentioning time convolution in the context of both of those theories. It eventually becomes this mass of misinformation that just keeps growing. And the more it grows, the harder it becomes to untangle the whole thing, and eventually this stuff just hits like critical mass, At some point, misinformation evolves into a self-sustaining ecosystem, and from that point forward, I don't know, but it kind of feels like there's nothing you can do about it anymore. It grows faster than you can fix it. It doesn't. Yeah. So yeah. This is lore hunting, so it's relatively inconsequential, and it's just Elden Ring, so it's more self-contained. And it's still relatively in its initial stages. And with this series, I'm trying to nip these seeds of what I see as misinformation in the bud, but I'm just a little girl making videos for a little audience in a little channel, and I fear it might be too late. we may have reached critical mass already. This Lord too shall be cooked. So, the order these videos were released goes Miss Chalice, then Ellen, and Smoketown. The first two are kinda very similar. They're both exploring that core theory we just talked about, so we're kinda done with them. Smoketown's video is a bit different though. First because he expands upon the subject a lot, and he isn't just talking about Gurranq and Maliketh being the same, he's talking about Shadowbound beasts in general. And second, and this is what I really want to start with here, he kinda doesn't actually address the two-body problem we just talked about. Like, when he brings up this problem in this video, he mentions a comment he got on another video where the commenter talked about Blythe coming back after you kill him, and his line of dialogue, "What harm can be done to a shadow?" Smoketown says, quote, "Quincy suggests that this line, and I agree with him, implies that shadows may not die so easily, in the normative corporeal sense, and even goes as far to suggest this is how Gurranq can exist in two locations, fully independently, for even if you kill Maliketh, Gurranq still exists." I think this is a great idea, and while it is speculation, I certainly think Blythe's line suggests that shadows are not so easy to kill, and I thank Quincy for highlighting this point about the shadow beast's immortality. End quote. What you may have noticed there is that he agrees with the comment when it says shadows may not die so easily, but that such endorsement is separate from the point regarding Gurranq existing in two locations. There's a bit of phraseology going on there. At first glance, it sounds like Smoketown is providing an answer to that problem, but he isn't. He isn't saying this is the answer to that problem. He's basically saying this is an interesting idea that may be related to that problem. And he doesn't provide an answer of his own. He breezes through this problem in literally 10 seconds. This is a foundational contradiction of the theory he's proposing, and I think a proper solution should have been provided. Even if it comes from somebody else's ideas, there's nothing wrong with that. And he doesn't provide enough information about what Quincy said on this matter as well, but based on the information that was provided, I have to say that the fact you come back after you die doesn't mean you get to be in two places at the same time. One thing has nothing to do with the other. Resurrection isn't the same thing as either cloning or time travel. An answer to the two-body problem has not been provided. So, yeah. That's as far as the discussion of the core theory goes in regards to this video, but there's still more to talk about. Like I said, Smoketown expands on the subject a bit, and we're going to discuss his ideas kinda following the same chapter structure that he used. There's Shadowborn, Nature of the Beast, which we'll be combining with Miquella/Malenia, Bloodhound Knights, and Vargram. Okay, let's go. In Shadowborn, Smoketown talks about how he thinks shadows aren't born, but rather created by the Two Fingers. And not only that, but that they're created from the Empyreans that they serve, which makes them an extension of those very same Empyreans. The most important argument here comes from Ronnie's dialogue. According to Smalltown, quote, Ronnie's description goes as far as to suggest their form is molded and tailored by the two fingers to suit their Empyrean. For she states, in the form of a vessel tailored for an Empyrean, as if Blythe himself was formed as he was by the two fingers. End quote. He comes back later in the video to this line of dialogue, saying that it makes pretty clear they are created by the two fingers. He also draws attention to the word bound in Shadowbound, saying, quote, I believe that when these vessels are created, they are created already connected to their Empyrean. They are born from their Empyrean in a way, born as if they are a part of them. And finally, he also mentions the fact Maliketh and Blythe are said to be half and step-brothers to their respective Empyreans, which would complement his interpretation of the word bound. And before addressing these arguments, I'd like to add a couple more lines of dialogue here. There's Blythe saying he's part of Ronnie's very being, which I don't think Smalltown quotes directly, but he does use that phrasing. And at one point, Ronnie also says Blythe was created a vessel for an Empyrean, which fits with Smalltown's arguments pretty nicely, I think. Now, this isn't going to take too long because, well, these are all kind of mistranslations. Oops, I guess. And since we're mentioning Japanese, then here's my usual disclaimer that I'm not fluent in Japanese, so there's that. Regardless, though, in the original Japanese, the first quote doesn't use the word tailored that was so important for Smalltown. It says Blythe was given, not tailored. Shadowbound doesn't use the word bound either, it's more like shadow vessel or shadow servant. And this video predates the DLC, right? Like the DLC also introduced the wolf crest shield, explicitly stating wolves had an oath with the Carians, right? Which, you know, fits better than being mystically bound in this context. And Maliketh was Marika's stepbrother, just like Blythe is to Ronnie. In Japanese, the first two arguments they just don't exist, right? Like, the words that led him to those conclusions simply aren't there in Japanese. And the brother stuff, personally, I don't think even half-brother really supports his conclusions either, but either way, stepbrother just goes against his theory, right? Stepbrothers bear no blood relation to their step-siblings. The shadows weren't created from their Empyreans, they were just given to them. They were born naturally given to them. The last two lines I added, the Japanese phrasing of the first one doesn't really make the same explicit suggestion. And in the second one, again, the word created just isn't used in Japanese. So, yeah. And in all fairness to the translators, Ronnie just talks weird. Like, it's not modern colloquial Japanese. And, well, yeah, this is a really weird situation. But I think all the arguments presented in these chapters were mistranslations. Sorry. And that leads us to the final conclusion of the chapter, which was that Maliketh and Blythe look different from each other because they were born from and bound to different Empyreans. But since they weren't tailored from their Empyreans, molded by the two fingers, then the most likely explanation for their differences is the apparent natural devolution process that happens between generations. Like, humans are said to have grown feeble and to have lost signs of the crucible. Ancient dragons gave way to drakes, and hybrids in general seem to have devolved since the times of the crucible. It's not unexpected that different generations of shadows serving in different eras would also have physical differences between them, right? Okay, so having explored how shadows come to be, Smoketown then explores the rules that dictate their very existence. He starts the chapter by talking about the notion that shadowbound beasts are bound not just to their appearance, but also to the will of the fingers that created them. Keeping in mind that the original arguments that led to these first conclusions were all mistranslations. This idea comes from Blythe. Wow. Hold on. This idea comes from Blythe seemingly going mad at the end of his quest line. At the end of his quest line, voice, and Iggy's dialogue saying that if Runny resists being an instrument of the two fingers, the shadow will go mad, transforming from a follower into a horrid curse. There are two problems here though. First, as far as I can tell, Iggy is the only source of the information regarding Blythe's fated transformation. And, with that in mind, his later retraction saying, Blythe became a curse that plagued Lady Runny, yet in madness gave himself to her. I've made a grave misjudgment, should take precedence over the initial assumption, right? Iggy proposed the initial theory. Then he took the new evidence that was presented to him into account, re-evaluated his position, and ultimately retracted his wrongful conclusion. Iggy is a great lore hunter. Runny too will tell you Blythe remained a loyal ally even after she turned her back upon her two fingers. There was no fated outcome because that outcome didn't come to pass. There was no mystical bond because shadows aren't bound in the sense Smoketown theorized in the first chapter. They are raised to be shadows. They are indoctrinated into their role. There is an expectation of loyalty to the system that gave them their only purpose in life, perhaps even some myth-making around that subject to help cement the idea and keep everybody in line. But shadows are their own selves, and they will do as their conscience bids them to. Which leads us to the second problem I have with this interpretation. I know certain areas of the lore lend themselves pretty well to assuming characters have been magically compelled to perform certain actions. There's charming, puppets, guidance. But I often see people applying these concepts to situations where there's no evidence for it. There's no evidence Mohg was charmed by Miquella. If Miquella could charm demigods, there would not have been a War of the Shattering. They wouldn't have had to kill Radahn. Mohg sided with Miquella because fuck the Golden Order, that's fucking why. The so-called Order had imprisoned him from birth in a goddamn underground gulag for the crime of being born an omen. Don't rob Mohg of his agency. There's no evidence Marika is either a literal puppet to the Greater Will or the Dr. Jekyll to the Glowmite Queen's Mr. Hyde. She's a genocidal maniac who's been doing multiple genocides for as long as we have records of her. And there's no evidence Blythe is a construct whose will is ultimately bound by the will of its creators. And given the lack of evidence for that conclusion, this interpretation robs him not only of his agency, but also of his quote-unquote humanity. Blythe wasn't there when Ronnie departed from the Rise. From his perspective, he was betrayed by his oldest friend, then came home to find his sister missing, and a bunch of assassins hanging around. Going berserk on you is a freaking natural response in a situation like that. He wasn't mad. He was grieving. And the outward appearance of what looks like madness to us is actually in keeping with his nature as a beast, which is ironic given the title of this chapter and the conclusions therein. He may talk like a human and walk like a human, but he is still a beast. That's not to say he isn't as quote-unquote evolved or intelligent as humans are, just that his natural behavior is different from ours. They're beasts, they growl and they howl and they learn English for the convenience of those around them. Blythe is best boy, and in a world filled with unsympathetic motherfuckers such as the likes of Gideon the whole asshole, Blythe is one of the most human characters this game has to offer. Leave my good boy alone. Okay, so next. Smoketown tackles the matter of their immortality. And I don't really have an alternative explanation to offer here as of yet, but I do need to say that their interpretation does not seem reasonable to me. If you kill Blythe before the encounter at the Rise, he'll say, "What harm can be done to a shadow?" and keep coming back over and over again, from which Smoketown deduces that Blythe can only be truly killed after Ronnie has killed her two fingers. Well, two more problems here. First, hanging around after one's death isn't exclusive to Blythe, right? I mean, go outside and kill a noble. He'll come back too. Shit, go outside and kill a goddamn boar and see if you can get it to stay dead. You can't. What harm can be done to a boar, I guess? Not to mention that Blythe keeps coming back, but Maliketh and Grunk don't. When you kill them, they just stay dead, and the fingers at the hold are still alive. Blythe's conditional immortality isn't tied to the fact he's a shadow, or to the fingers to whom he isn't bound. As we have already discussed, he isn't bound to them. This is just a small piece of a much larger framework that needs to be analyzed as a whole. Smoketown's interpretation here not only ignores some important context particular to this specific situation, it is also objectively incomplete, given the scope of this framework as it exists in the lands between. And then there's the Baleful Shadows. This chapter states that these shadows are copies of Blythe, created by the Two Fingers and connected to Ronnie. Smoketown concludes that, quote, "This is why she needs these shadows eliminated, so she can fully shed her attachment to the Two Fingers. With Blythe eliminated and these shadows severed, Ronnie is able to fully rid herself of her Two Fingers." End quote. In the end, Smoketown also proposes that Bunny had always known her friends would have to die, and that was part of her plan, which is indicated by the Black Knife assassins who came for E.G. and Blythe. Okay, so first of all, I do need to ask this again. What about Maliketh though? Like, Blythe and the Baleful Shadows are shadowbound beasts that look and fight the same, and they assume these are separate individuals. Meanwhile, Maliketh and Grunk are also shadowbound beasts that look and fight the same, but they assume those are the same guy actually. And I'm not even saying these conclusions can't be made to work together, but I think that's a big discrepancy, and I think it'd have been nice if Smoketown had taken the time to address that. And that's not really a counter-argument, right? That's just... Okay, that's just a side note. Let's just move along, okay? Okay, so there's two problems here again. I swear this isn't on purpose. I'm just fated to have two problems with two-finger related subjects, apparently. Go figure. Well, first of all, again, for real this time, this is kind of a moot point. Maybe. I don't think that's the word I'm looking for, but regardless, the thing is, Bunny is on her merry way to the Moonlight Altar. She isn't hunting for the Baleful Shadows. The Baleful Shadows are hunting her. She doesn't need to kill these shadows so she can fully shed her attachment to the two fingers. She needs to kill the shadows so she doesn't get killed by them. You know? That's like right there as the explanation for it. And second, Smoketown plays a little loose with his words there, which leaves a little room for interpretation, but I think what he's proposing constitutes a bit of circular logic. Like, Run is supposed to kill the two fingers before Blythe can be killed, but she also needs to kill the Baleful Shadows before she can kill her two fingers. But Blythe and the Baleful Shadows would be functionally the same thing, right? They're all shadows created by the same two fingers and bound to the same Empyrean. So she needs to kill the fingers in order to kill the shadows, but she needs to kill the shadows in order to kill the fingers. But she needs to kill the fingers so she can kill the shadows, so on and so forth. It just kinda doesn't make sense to me. Okay, so at this point, I'd like to merge this chapter with a later one about Mikela and Malenia. In that chapter, Smoketown says, quote, "So there are of course two other Empyreans that were chosen by the fingers, Mikela and Malenia, and it begs the question, who are their shadow-bound beasts? In short, for me, we just don't see them in the game, but we have to assume that they did have one." So, he's asking two separate questions, right? Who are the Baleful Shadows, and who are Mikela and Malenia's shadows? And he came so close to finding an answer here. He's already asking the right questions. All he needed to do was put two and two together and realize that the first question is actually the answer to the second one. There are two Empyreans, seemingly missing their shadows, and there are seemingly masterless shadows running around. The Baleful Shadows are Mikela and Malenia's shadows. Right? You had both pieces in your hand, man. You just had to put them together. And like, yeah. That begs the question of why are the Baleful Shadows helping Runny's two fingers, but like, Running is Miquela's competition, right? There's more to it. I've talked about it in my videos before, but even at this most basic level, that's not so strange when you think about it, right? That Miquela and Malenia's shadows would be hunting for Runny. And lastly, regarding his final conclusion, that Runny had planned to kill Blythe and Iggy all along. There's no reason to assume the Black Knife assassins worked for her. You know, she sabotaged the Night of the Black Knives. They imprisoned Alecto, the ringleader, in the Moonlight Altar. They all worked together during the night of the plot. But they're not in speaking terms anymore. They're not on the same team anymore. Runny did not have them killed. So, yeah. There's no reason to believe shadows are created from their Empyreans, or bound to the will of the Two Fingers, or that the baleful shadows are copies of Blythe. There's just not much to go on here. You know, that's not to mention the whole Gurranq is Maliketh thing too, right? As I have explained, there's no reason to believe that either. Smoke Town doesn't even actually address that subject here, so yeah, you know. And we're kind of done with the video at this point, actually. There's 2 more chapters, but that's not going to take too long, I don't think. Regarding the Bloodhound Knights, Smoke Town proposes they're basically furries LARPing as Shadowbound beasts, right? He doesn't phrase it like that, but yeah. And that one of them disguised themselves as Blythe to try and kill Runny. And, well, are they furries? Yes. Yes, they are. Are they masters of disguise? No. No, they're not. The Black Wolf mask is more likely fashioned out of a baleful shadow. Miquela and Malenia are 2 Empyreans with 2 shadows. We killed one in Oxtella, the other one had been sent to kill Runny in Caria Manor sometime in the past. Like, the Black Wolf mask is the head of a shadow. It just makes more sense that it was taken from a shadow, right? And regarding Vargram, Smoke Town proposes that he was on a quest to serve as a shadow to the Glowmite Queen. And maybe, like, I'm not sure, to be honest, but it kinda makes sense to me. This is just tangentially connected to the whole Shadowbound lore thing, so we don't really need to get into it right now, I don't think. And yeah, I think he might be right about that one. And, well, that's it. That's the end of his video, and this is the end of this debate session. Nothing made sense to me. Thanks for coming around. Goodbye. Hi, hello. You made it to the end. Welcome and thank you. This was a much shorter, much simpler video, right? Compared to the last one, at least. But I think it deals with a very foundational concept that really needed to be addressed. I really hope, time convolution doesn't infect Elden Ring lore like it did with Dark Souls. We'll see how that goes, I guess. Thank you all very much for watching, as always. We can all be broken together in this little safe space, right? A special thank you to all my wonderful patrons: Sinclair Lore, Balan, Little Vampire, Sam D, Hubal, Taylor Reed, Medium Hat Logan, Derp, Brain Douche, Mr. Pudding, Kyle Van Ripper, and Tom Sparks. Y'all rock. Until next time, stay safe, and I'll see you around. Bye bye.